Hello everyone and welcome back to Notes on Photography. This is an underwater housing for a Voigtlander Bessa with a 12mm. I once shot T-Max 3200 in a shark cage with this, and I shot like 4 frames and then it broke, and then the person in the cage with me threw up. So I got that going for me, which is nice. This has nothing to do with today's film. This is a bookshelf that I made in shop class in 8th grade, and I still have it. So for any of you out there who were questioning my credentials, look, I can make stuff like this, and it's actually kind of level and it still works, and there are some actual square 90-degree angles on this thing, believe it or not. And hey, the bad kids in the class used to lock my shop teacher in the cage during class and then leave and go to like Las Palapas and get a burrito. So I had that going for me. Louis L'Amour books, I put these out here because my literary friends go crazy. My literary snob friends go crazy when they see Louis L'Amour, because Louis L'Amour does not circulate in those high levels of literature. But anybody who knows Louis L'Amour, who read these books as a kid or who is reading them as an adult, you know how addictive they are. I've read all of them. I love it. But let's talk about notes on photography. Earlier today, I was on a run. I think I ran about 4.5 miles. I don't know. I don't run very far or very fast, but I was on a run and I was on a piece of property that's owned by an Italian couple. And I think that's why I started thinking about this body of work in this particular photograph we're going to dissect in this episode of Notes on Photography. I think this photograph is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, I believe it is representative of how I see the world as a photographer. For the first 10 years of my career, so imagine shooting every single day for 10 years and still thinking to yourself, I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. I'm not sure I know who I am if I was left to my own devices. Like, what photographer would I be? How would I shoot? What am I doing? Once I figured that out, I was able to start compiling bodies of work that I think reflected the kind of style that I was best represented by. And I think this picture in particular is a part of that. And I want to give you the little backstory about this picture. But the second part that's important about this picture is it talks about spacing. Now, I went through 4 years of photojournalism school, and not a single person ever mentioned to me the word spacing. Spacing is the distance between elements in your frame: foreground, midground, background. I have a very specific spacing that I look for when I'm making pictures and I'm doing stories. It took me forever to refine and determine what that spacing was. When I started out and was a young photographer, I was a 24mm photographer. So my spacing was reflected in being right up on top of people in the middle of things with a 24. I thought that was what I liked. As I got older, a little better, a little more mature, I jumped from the 24 to a 35. The 35, that sort of spacing hung with me for years, and I thought, okay, I'm a 35mm guy. And I kept buying 50mm lenses and sending them back or trading them or selling them. I don't know how many I bought before I finally landed on an f2 Leica 50, and it was like a light switch going off. I loved the lens. I loved the look it gave me, and I realized as I got even older and decrepit, and I was basically like the sick wildebeest wandering too close to the river full of crocs, I was like, I'm a 50mm guy. And so the spacing that's reflected in these photographs to me is really about understanding that 50mm and saying, I am looking for a set of ingredients that will work, and a set of ingredients that's reflective of me. So the image that we're going to look at was shot in Sicily. And I am not Sicilian, I'm not Italian, I don't speak the language, and I'm not Catholic. And so this was a project about Catholicism in Sicily, and that was translated through what are called Easter processions. During the celebration of Easter every year in Sicily, there are these amazing processions that happen. Now, you also see these in places like mainland Italy. You see them in Mexico, you see them in the Philippines, but the ones in Sicily are very specific and very unique. In addition, every region of Sicily is different, and every town within every region is different. Their procession is specific to that one little town. So the range of what you see, Greek, Albanian, Italian, Sicilian, Moorish, all of these influences. There's even a little town that has like an American Easter celebration. It's crazy. So I made 4 trips to Sicily over about a 6-year span. I would go for several weeks at a time, 2 to 3 weeks. I sometimes went with just my wife and other times I went with another photographer. We would research a section of the country. We would try to do as much research as possible to learn about the small towns and what we could expect to see and when these things were happening. And then we would get to Sicily and realize that all of our research was for naught, but we had a local friend who was a Sicilian photographer who was incredibly intelligent and well-connected and friendly, and he would help us facilitate. So we were in one of these towns, and we would land in a town like this, and it was very small. There were virtually no tourism and no tourists at all. So sometimes the police would come and ask us what we were doing and who we were. But most of and the police were always very cool about it. And a lot of times the locals would be like, what are you doing here? And we'd explain it. And they'd be like, holy cow, these people came from America and they think our town is really important. And it was great. Sicilian people are awesome. So we would get to these towns and the procession would typically go from point A to point B. And sometimes it was in the middle of the night. Sometimes it was early morning, sometimes middle of the day. You didn't know. And typically nothing ever happened when it was supposed to. So you had to be prepared to be out 24 hours at a time for all kinds of weather, from blazing sun and heat to absolute freezing mountain storms. You had to sort of be prepared. And we would land in these towns, and then once the procession started, we would all disperse so that nobody was in anybody else's way or stepping on anyone else's toes. The image that I'm showing today was something that what I realized too with my spacing was if the main procession was in the middle of the street, that was not my space. My space was typically off to the edges of where the procession was happening. That's where I tended to find the images that I liked the most. It wasn't like I wasn't shooting the procession, I was, but I was looking for the fringe. So the image that we're gonna look at today was what I would call a fringe image of the procession. I had wandered away from the procession. Part of the procession was happening, but there was another part that was going to happen that involved people that were pretending to be Roman soldiers. And I found where they were preparing to become part of the procession. So imagine the main group is moving along like this. I'm off to the edge, somewhere back here. I find these people that are prepping, and they are gonna eventually come around and become part of the procession from behind. So I'm over here photographing. There is no one else around. And I start to feel the ingredients that I look for in an image coming together. Now, sounds maybe a little woo-woo for you, and if it is, maybe sit down, have a cup of tea, relax, take a nap, I don't know. And maybe this is in my own head, but I don't care if it is because it works for me. The longer you do photography, the more you commit to something like a single lens, a single body, and a single film so that you're not thinking about anything else or anyone else. All you're looking at is the chessboard in front of you, and you're looking at pieces and you're watching things like light, timing, composition. You're waiting for pieces to happen. When you get in an environment where your style of image is happening, you will feel it before you see it. It is a wonderful feeling. It makes you feel like you have an understanding of your craft. I felt that. I walked up on a small mound of dirt and I saw the roads going out and I saw the pieces starting to move, and I said, there is a picture here for me. I have to wait, I have to be ready, and I have to make sure I'm in precisely the right position to make this work. So let's take a look at this image and I'll break down why I think it works and how I did it. Hello people, just before we get started, just realize that I did this again. I actually recorded this on my external monitor, not realizing that the external monitor recording through ScreenFlow would not be as sharp as it is on the actual laptop screen. So now I'm doing this film again. All the films I've done today, I've done twice. This is the image in question. And I want to break this down, but I want to give you a little, again, remind you of a little bit of the technical backstory here. I went to Sicily, I think 4 years, over a 6-year span. I shot 2 Leica bodies and 2 lenses the entire time. I shot an M4 and M6 with a 35mm lens on one camera and a 50mm lens on the other. They never came off. I never changed anything. And I shot the entire project over the entire time with T-Max 3200 film, rated anywhere from 800, 16, 32, 6400, depending on the conditions. That is very important. I am looking for a consistency of image, a consistency of look. If I was going to mix up and shoot multiple formats and color and black and white, this story would have been a disaster. So it really helped me to settle on one particular look and theme, because if you are thinking about your equipment in the field, you will never make a good project. It just is impossible to do. The people who are very solid, who can consistently produce results, have consolidated on one look and style and feel, and that is what they do. So I think if you haven't done that yet, it actually would be a really wonderful experience for you to try that, to go for an extended period of time, maybe take a year and just commit to a lens and a body and a film and just do nothing but. There are a few things about this image I really like, but as you can see, I am up above these two people right here. If I was on their level, you would not be seeing it from this point of view because I'd be more down sort of towards where the horse is. I am standing on a mound of dirt. When I walked up on that mound of dirt, the first thing that caught my eye was this road and this road. It wasn't anything else. It was just these two dynamic elements. And a dynamic element is a diagonal that runs through a rectangular frame, typically from side to side or from front to back. And it basically is a way that allows the viewer's eye to travel. It's an aid, it's an assist for the viewer to be able to go, oh, I think naturally my eye is supposed to follow this progression. And that's what I have here. I have two of these, so I kind of got lucky. That's what got my attention. But I also have a foreground with the horse, the two folks and the horse. I've got a midground right here, and I've also got, let me redo these. I've also got a background. I've got two people here, and I've got this whole group of people over here. So I have all three working for me. Foreground, midground, background, all working in the same frame. In addition, I think we have little moments within moments. If I look at the foreleg of this horse here, it is in motion. That horse is taking a step, and you have this nice V here with the hoof just off the ground. And I've got a little motion. Same for this kid right here. He's in motion. He's moving. His legs are apart. He's taking a step. His arm is gesturing up towards his face. I've got something happening there. There's action. I could say the same for this back here. And I could even say this Roman soldier back here anchoring the side works. Also, these two people here are not looking at me. They're looking this direction, which is great. Now, if they were looking at me, I'd still probably use this image, but I like it better because it shows that I'm in the scene without impacting the scene. I am the only tourist around. By all rights, they should be staring at me, but they're not. They're looking off, and that to me comes with practice. That comes with being in foreign situations enough to be able to make pictures, but sort of suck your energy back into your body so that it's not projecting out into the scene and you're like impacting and affecting everything around. There is not a single person in this frame that's looking at me. And I'm standing on a mound. I'm a tourist standing on a mound of dirt in front of all of them, and no one's looking at me. Finally, this little element here in the background of these two women walking towards me, to me, is very, very important because the picture in the picture here is right here. One of the pictures in the pictures is right there. That is a very important element. It adds a little piece of humanity to the back and gives me a nice background. Lastly, I got lucky. I have texture in the sky. Now, if this was a bright sunny day, I would have been cursing myself and my luck to not have any texture in the sky. I think the moodiness of this picture is greatly impacted by the weather that you're looking at, and getting my exposure and my processing down to where I kept detail in the sky while retaining detail in the darkest parts of the image. So there is detail all the way into these shadows, and that comes from correct exposure, correct processing for a piece of negative film. So that, in essence, is why I think this picture is interesting. It's good. It is probably one of 50 from this project that I made over 4 years, and I like it. I think also, too, if I had to just add anything else, I think the landscape itself, which kind of reminds me of a moonscape, for example, for some reason. These sparse trees, this old housing back here, the little bits of garbage and trash, I don't know, it just all adds to the mood. So that's it. That's why I like this picture, and I have sold this print a few times to people, which always makes me happy, and that was it. I enjoyed it, and I hope you found that interesting. So that was the latest episode of Notes on Photography. I hope that was helpful. This is an image that I have printed many times. People have bought this image many times, and it makes me feel good when I see it because it was a moment, more than anything else, it just was a moment that I look back on with fondness. It was a great time in my life. I was a freelance photographer, mostly free, little Lance, as my father used to say. And I had a lot of time to travel and work on projects. And I would go to Sicily with no computer. I had a little Motorola flip cell phone that I could send text messages with, but there was no social media. There was no digital umbilical back to home. I wasn't checking in with anyone. We would just go and we would be fully immersed in the experience and the place and the people. And I absolutely miss those days, because I don't see many people working that way anymore. I certainly can't work that way anymore. And it is one of those things that I look back on and think to myself, what have we given up in the race for connectivity, technology, sharing, fame? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with more.